Chris Watts. I'm doing my communication speech for Brenda Armentrout, and welcome to Broomfield, Colorado. About 70 degrees, and it's awesome outside, so welcome. I'm doing my speech on relationship deterioration and repair, and this is my PowerPoint to help you. Deterioration. The relationship begins to fall apart, crumble, or fail. You have weakening bonds. You get bored of the everyday routine, and you get distractions such as work, hobbies, relationships, no matter how harmless, even at the job. You might meet a new person, and it could strengthen into something else, and could weaken the bond you have with the partner you have. You spend less time with each other, and sometimes you have no time to maintain the relationship. Sometimes in a relationship, you maybe make promises that can turn into a major betrayal, or minor arguments that could turn into things where you can say spiteful comments, which turn into bigger problems. The first phase of deterioration is interpersonal dissatisfaction, which when you become unhappy with all the everyday interactions with you and your partner. You also begin to view your future with your partner as a negative future. And the second phase is interpersonal deterioration, which you start to grow farther and farther apart. And you share less of your free time with each other. You have more awkward silences at dinner, or when you're just out by yourself, you don't talk at all. You disclose less of your feelings, and you show less affection toward each other. When you have good communication, you show more nonverbal communication, which is the majority of the messages we send, like through gestures, facial expressions, eye contact, the tone of your voice. And there's many types of forms of communication these days, and it's the most successful groundwork for relationships. A few quotes that I've done research on from Elaine Schemberg: all relationships problems stem from poor communication skills, which is very true. And another quote from Schemberg and Sorjan: you can't communicate while you're checking your BlackBerry, watching TV, or flipping through sports section, which is very true. With technology nowadays, you'll be on your iPhone, your BlackBerry, at a restaurant, and you'll see two people at a table, and you'll see both of them on their phones, either Facebook comment, status, or maybe playing a game, and there's no communication at all. Commitment is the degree of commitment affects your relationship. According to Hirofumi, not surprisingly, commitment is especially strong when individuals are satisfied with their relationship, and grows weaker as individuals become less satisfied. You have to ask yourself 3 questions when you're in a relationship. Do I have a desire to keep this relationship going? Do I have a moral obligation to stay in this relationship? Or is it a necessity for me to stay in this relationship? According to my research, sometimes a necessity could be children. Sometimes when you have children and your relationship starts to deteriorate, a child could help repair it. All relationships are held together in part by a form of commitment, either based on desire, obligation, or necessity. And when the commitment is strong enough to hold the relationship together, you avoid arguing about minor disagreements, and you support one another. When commitment is weak, the relationship is full of doubt, and the relationship deteriorates faster. You have 2 types of deterioration. You have sudden and you have gradual. Sudden would be an example of infidelity. When somebody is not faithful to their partner, the partners realize that the relationship cannot be sustained. Gradual would be if you met somebody at work, or a new friendship has occurred, and as it goes on, you see that, okay, maybe this relationship has more potential than the relationship I have with my partner. And that would gradually push the old relationship out and push the new relationship in. Reasons relationships start to fall apart. Sometimes you no longer find your partner attractive, physically or in their personality. When you're in a relationship, you have to show desire, lust towards your partner. Sometimes when you get married, that the lust and the desire kind of falls by the wayside a little bit. But if you want your relationship to keep going, I would suggest maybe go to a place where you first met, or go bungee jumping, go somewhere that will bring the excitement back. You no longer experience closeness, or when your differences become more important than similarities, you just pick apart your partner, and you don't see anything that you have in common anymore. You just see something he or she does, and it just gets on your nerves, and you just can't let that go. And you feel you might do better with someone else that you've met. You think that you can no longer do, that your partner is someone that you can't be with. When you feel you are putting more into the relationship than you are getting out. According to Bloomstein and Schwartz, when a relationship breaks up, it's generally the more attractive one that leaves, which I agree with somewhat and then I disagree with. When in repair, the stage is not always pursued. Sometimes people, when the relationship starts to dissolve, repair is not an option and they want to get away and start new.
Chris Watts is sadly a name that likely needs no introduction. The meek and mild-mannered echoist, raised under a watchful and overly protective eye, seemingly aimless, in constant tow of his betters. Under extraordinary financial stress and nearing bankruptcy for the second time, Chris would find solace in the arms of another, sculpting a glass castle that would quickly shatter when he took the lives of his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. In part 1 of the Chris Watts Trilogy, we looked at the life of Shanann, a driven and extraordinarily focused wife, caught up in the life she wanted, rather than the one she lived. In this episode, we'll take a look at the life of Chris before the murders, a mostly dull and unexciting independence, which would strangely win him a trophy wife, the growing tensions between them and the ultimate breaking point, and Nicole, the perhaps unwitting participant in the shift of Chris's mental state. In this, part 2 of the Watts family murders, with something criminal. Before we begin, I would like to correct a mistake I made in part 1. Embarrassingly, I mixed up the girls' temperaments, a careless slip of the tongue and poor oversight from tired eyes. Thank you to the subscribers and viewers who have pointed this out. Accountability is everything, and something I aim for constantly. I am comforted by the fact there is such a strong community surrounding true crime, who also aim to ensure the truth is properly told. Chris Watts was born on May 16, 1985, to parents Cindy and Ronald Watts. He is one of 2 children. Chris and his sister Jamie grew up on Vass Road on the outer limits of a small town called Spring Lake in North Carolina. The Watts family was from modest roots. Ronnie was a hard-working father, quiet and agreeable, much like his son. Jamie, their daughter, took more after their mother, a rebellious child with a domineering mentality, always striving to be the alpha in the room. Mother Cindy loved her son Chris dearly, the type of mother whose son could do no wrong. She paraded him as much as she sheltered him. Reports suggest a streak of narcissistic parent syndrome. Cindy was possessively close to Chris, and often felt threatened by his growing independence. Chris was oblivious to his mother's nature, something he had known since birth. He felt comfort under her strong wing and guidance. Much research has been done on the lasting effects of being raised in a narcissistic environment. While behaviors can differ wildly from case to case, most, if not all, develop a trait known as echoism. Named after the Greek myth of Narcissus and Echo, the term narcissism in psychology was first introduced by Sigmund Freud in 1914 and was used to describe a variety of clinical phenomena, both pathological and healthy, and intrinsically related to ego. Since then, narcissism has grown to be an entire arm of psychology, constantly evolving. It is recognized as a deep and complex cognitive pattern of the internal self, built or learned over many years from a variety of consistent factors. With parental narcissism, the home is usually a place of marginalization, grandiosity, superficiality, and typically some sort of codependence. The parent can exhibit these traits in a variety of ways, from constantly undermining the actions of their child regardless of merit, to possessive jealousy and emotional coercion. The narcissist will rarely ever distinguish this trait amongst themselves. The inability to accept anything but their vision of the world makes them a difficult person to talk with. The walls they construct can be tall and wide. Broadly speaking, in the children the narcissistic parent may raise, common byproducts of the unhealthy environment include the very things pushed upon them in their upbringing. Quite often, victims experience a lack of self-worth and struggle to have a voice of their own in the wake of loving the narcissists in their lives. The close relationship these victims, or echoists, might develop as adults are often ones of a guarded submission, leading to frustration and eventual dissolution. Echoists often crave the narcissist wing to shield and guide them with varying degrees of intensity. Like the Greek myth, mimicry and short-sight are common echoist traits. Attending Pine Forest High School, Chris excelled at mechanics. A natural with motors, he placed third at the North Carolina Automobile Dealers Association competition in Winston-Salem, receiving a $1,000 scholarship to UTI and NASCAR Tech in Mooresville. It's unclear if he ever took advantage of this bursary. Chris's former teacher, Joe Duty, recalls how Watts was one of the best students he ever had, claiming Watts had a sort of photographic memory, able to recall complete schematics at will. Back then, when a teen's ambitions reach far beyond the stars, Chris had dreams of working his way up on a NASCAR team, his endgame, crew chief. Socially, Chris was a bit of an introvert, the type of guy who was quiet until you talked to him. Then his somewhat awkward charm would take over and put you at ease. He wasn't an unpopular kid. People knew and liked him, but he seemed to prefer the shadows over groups or cliques, reportedly rarely ever speaking his mind, even among intimate situations. Quiet and awkward, Chris was the object of desire for more than one teen-crazed love. Chris never acted on any of the advances, allegedly staying single throughout the entirety of his years in school. Out of school and now on his own, Chris obtained work as a mechanic at a local shop. A natural at his job, he was making great money, doing something he loved. He began to break free from the reserved and quiet boy he was in school. Still no socialite, but was likely Spring Lake's most eligible bachelor. As an adult, free from the watchful eye of his domineering mother, Chris began to seek companionship. Somewhere along the way, Chris had been given the name of a young girl, divorced but kind and pretty. Chris crept her page like everyone does nowadays. Under the constant urging from his closest friends, he reached out and, much to his surprise, Shanann accepted his friend request. Unsure, and perhaps still a little apprehensive, the courtship lasted months. Shanann kept Chris at arm's length, forcing him through a gauntlet of relationship requirements. Foot rubs, massages, gifts for no reason. Shanann loved control, and Chris seemed to love giving it. More of a point-and-go kind of guy, he was a perfect match for Shanann's bull rush mentality about tackling life. She would finally submit months later, and it was a classically dependent and fast-moving kind of affair, falling into each other's arms and lives very quickly, with Chris moving into her massive house almost right away. The shift from humble roots into apparent affluence must have seemed a thing of wonder and power. That lavish lifestyle in an oversized house, a modest career and a trophy girlfriend in a small and tight-knit community was a fantasy that quickly fell apart. Shanann was under a costly treatment for lupus, was suddenly jobless, and allegedly under investigation. Chris married into these problems in 2012. However, their planned escape into solvency was already underway. The two had been to Colorado before their wedding, and Chris had purchased a plot of land and soon-to-be-built home in a quaint little suburb in the town of Frederick. Chris was the sole buyer. Shanann's crippling and unsustainable financial commitments would have only damaged their application. Years later, she would be added to the deed. In a sort of sweep, grossly in arrears with an almost impossible climb out, Shanann sold her home in a short sale, well under market value. The difference between value, equity, and sale was significant. A figure well into the thousand. This dark cloud of debt would follow them for years to come. Now living a new life with a fresh start in Colorado, the both of them working modest positions at a local Ford dealership, Shanann would give birth to their first daughter, Bella, on December 17, 2013. Not uncommon for young newlyweds with a newborn to ask for help. Sandy and Frank, Shanann's parents, moved to Colorado to live with them in their home. Retired with no commitments, they would stay for over a year before returning to North Carolina. Chris would find work at Anadarko Oilfields in January of 2015 and quit Longman Ford. A significant boost in income, this new position as an oilfield operator should have allowed them a comfortable life. Shanann, now pregnant with a second child, opted to leave Longman Ford rather than work less hours, and focused instead back on the MLM dream, this time finding Thrive. Still under extraordinary and inescapable financial distress, largely in part to living outside their means, the couple declared bankruptcy shortly before the birth of their second daughter, Celeste. Ever the optimist, Shanann was all in with her home-based income. Thrive Life was initially great, alleged multi-$1,000 paychecks, countless lifestyle vacations, a company car. Shanann seemed to be succeeding right out of the gate. With a washed debt ratio and a suddenly high income, it would seem as though the Watts had reclaimed their path to excellence. From there, however, those first few electric steps, they would stumble, and to Chris, it seemed like never recover, slipping quickly back into familiar financial distress. Ultimately, the conventions, flights to them and back, hotels, Thrive vacations, and even just Thrive product purchase itself, all had to be paid for. Shanann was fully committed to the lifestyle, justifying their blown-out expenses as her right or reward. Unlike Shanann, Chris was not nearly as successful a salesperson, failing to qualify for most of the vacations and any of the desired tier bonuses. Chris acted as more of a surplus buyer for Shanann than anything. 2018 and the Watts family has seen their share of continued failures, a perpetual 2 steps back for every step forward. This constant state of distress caused obvious ripples in their home, and as things began to unravel, the usual role of desperate couple conversations ensued, and they eventually speak about having another baby. Chris wants a boy, and always has. This dominating desire for a son, despite the shotgun decision, pushed them temporarily closer. Finding a renewed intimacy, they wasted no time in trying.
Hey, guess what, girls? Mommy has a baby in her belly. Are you guys excited? Yes? Are you really excited? Oh my goodness. Come give me hugs. Oh! I love you, girl.
I got the baby a hug.
You want to give the baby a hug? I love you, Bella. You're so sweet. Give me this.
Mommy.
Very little time would pass before Shanann announces her pregnancy. Chris feigns joy, but rather than making time to be the active expecting father and joining Shanann to the doctor and ultrasounds, he instead finds reasons to be distant, and the pair quickly fell back into the confusing environment of all push, no pull. The ever-vocal Cindy Watts holds no punches in expressing her disdain over the pregnancy, feeling this was another nail in her son's coffin, highlighting their current financial inability to afford another child. the relationship between Chris and his daughters was somewhat awkward. Chris seemed to favor Celeste, the rambunctious and wild child, and she loved him. Cece could most often be found attached to Chris, somewhere in the house. Constantly in tow, she adored her father. Chris would try to connect with Bella, and although Bella loved him thoroughly, Chris would never truly gap that divide.
What are they doing up here?
Bella was a confident and self-assured young girl, one of those children whose eyes speak wisdom well beyond her years. Their relationship was one more based on proxy than the blood that bound them.
Ready for the test?
Yeah.
You'll pass?
No.
Do the test.
Alright. So what happens in... I know. So what happens in space?
I know.
Do you float?
It's funny.
Do you float or do you sink?
Sick.
Do you float or do you sink?
Float.
Good job. So when you crash in a space shuttle, do you go down a slide or do you jump out?
Jump out.
You go down a slide or do you jump out?
Jump out.
No, you didn't get that. You go down a slide.
That's right.
Yes. So when the astronauts are getting very fit, do they lift weights or do they eat McDonald's?
Tunnels.
Do they lift weights or eat McDonald's?
Tunnels.
Okay, you got 1 out of 3 so far. You're doing too well.
June 14th, 2018, Chris officially stores the number of a young girl at the oilfield administration building, the daughter of the super on site, Nicole Kessinger. Nicole was on contract position with the oil field and was immediately the object of fascination for Chris. She was young, beautiful, grossly intelligent, charming, and financially organized, an alpha of sorts. This must have seemed exactly like the escape he was looking for. She had a confidence about her that seemed to transcend the fantasy he was currently living. She seemed to know what she wanted and knew how to get it. It's been argued that her confidence was a clear fetish for Chris, something that his egoist nature craved. Over the next few days, they chatted often, the both of them locked in an awkward dance of courtship, finding reasons to bump into each other. The excitement of meeting someone with shared animal attraction washed over them both. There was an obvious chemistry between them. Quickly, their innocent curiosity became a confident, sexual tension, and Chris began creating a parallel world for them to thrive, telling Nicole on June 17th that he's married, but in the midst of a divorce. He tells her he is sleeping in the basement and is only staying at the house for the sake of his daughters. A risky claim, as both Chris and Shanann's Facebook profiles were wide open. Even a quick glance at either of their pages would have cast doubt on his words. Outside the constant praise they gave each other, seemingly every moment of their lavish lifestyle was captured and posted, depicting a healthy, involved, and loving family, not the broken home of abuse Chris claimed he endured. Shanann is now fully aware the relationship between Chris and her is nearing dissolution. She did not want to lose Chris. He was a good father, husband, and devoted provider for them all when he was present. Even more detached and unusually dismissive, Chris seemed oblivious to the crumbling home around him. Shanann was overly present. The elephant energy in the room was inescapable for them both. Shanann tried everything, the usual actions of a desperate partner, but Chris was vocally absent, responsive only to sex, and even that was unpredictable. When cornered, Chris would bounce from the definitive to the uncertain, throwing more ambiguity into the mix, which in turn added fuel to Shanann's crusade to save their family. When Shanann left for North Carolina on June 27th, Chris saw the obvious opportunity to cultivate his affair with Nicole. He was careful, never driving the GPS-tracked company truck to their dates, or letting Nicole use the front door when she would visit, where the security cam would record and report visitors directly to Shanann. Instead, she allegedly entered through a basement window. However, this was never proven and is only speculative. Chris would pay for dinners and trips with prepaid credit cards, a trip to the dunes, museums, and picnics. He was extraordinarily careful and never left an obvious trail.
Carve it up.
It's a wonder that Nicole never questioned this odd behavior. She would later insist to police she had never suspected Chris was lying about the divorce, despite the staggering weight of all the evidence suggesting she should have known. Playing her part as the dangerous liaison in Chris's life, she would pose for sexy pictures to couple their already steamy affair, and play along with his ruse, blindly or not. Her cell phone and computer search history showcase her sudden change in content, from the mundane and ordinary to wedding dresses and honeymoons. Nicole was just as caught up in the adultery as Chris. Perhaps Chris became complacent, overly confident, and swept up in the moment. Chris paid for a dinner out with Nicole on his debit card, something Shanann immediately caught and became suspicious of. July 9th, Chris receives an angry phone call, followed by a lengthy text from Shanann. Cindy had given Celeste ice cream that contained nuts, something she was allergic to. Shanann, understandably upset, uses this incident also as a platform for their growing marital issues. Chris does not play into it, keeping classically cool on the exterior. Inside, he starts thinking about more aggressive ways to leave his family. The alleged conception of his fateful plan, born from the rage he felt from what he called Nutgate. As Shanann fought harder for answers and direction, Chris withdrew further from their relationship. Shanann's demanding personality became a chore for Chris to endure, and he eventually started ignoring her multiple calls and texts. A significant blow, as Chris had made a career of being the always available partner. It would seem no longer was Chris headed solely where he was pointed. He had clumsily taken a hold of the wheel and kicked out all the passengers, except one. This balancing act, all the lies to Shanann and his circle of friends who became unwitting alibis, the clandestine meetings and overall proximity of all the players, is an undertaking that is clearly destined to fail. July 31st, Chris sends Nicole a love letter before leaving for North Carolina. The Rusacks would say that Chris seemed somewhat distant during this trip. He was, as always, a devoted father and husband, but somehow seemed detached, and they all noticed the change. There are conflicting stories on whether or not the Rosette clan knew directly of the problems between Chris and their daughter. It would seem Shanann relied almost exclusively on the solace of her friends over family. Bella and Celeste were overjoyed when their father Chris arrived. He always paid special attention to them, and for the last week of their vacation, they knew their dad had days of fun planned. In between trips to the beach and picnic lunches, privately, Shanann tried to talk with Chris. Conversations that would turn to frustrated arguments, resurrecting old gripes and misgivings. It seemed as though Shanann would flip between fighting for Chris and against him. Chris would respond as he usually did, somewhat agreeably, walking the fine line between submission and actually having a spine. Back at home in Colorado, problems continued between Chris and Shanann, both of them equal contributors into the awkward air around their home, with one focused and driven long-sight planner covering all the bases, and the other quietly planning a permanent escape. Strangely, perhaps in an act of solidarity, or more likely a preemptive play to eliminate a trail, Chris suddenly deletes all of his social media accounts. He texts Shanann this photo on August 9th, and she posts it to her wall. Shanann leaves for another Thrive convention with neighbor and friend Nicole Atkinson on August 10th. The next night, Chris asks a neighbor to babysit the kids as he has tickets to a Colorado Rockies game with some friends at work. This is a lie. He instead heads to Erie for a date with Nicole. Chris would spend the rest of his time with his 2 daughters, at parks or at friends for a birthday. He would later tell investigators this was something he wanted to ensure, that Bella and Celeste were happy all weekend. Sunday, August 12th, Chris sends a message to a coworker at Anadarko about a pump that needed attention, letting him know he will head out there early in the morning to have a look. This seemed a little strange. Weekends were sacred amongst the crew, and while it was not out of the ordinary for their boss to message them the Sunday before returning to work, it was something Chris had never done, or would have any reason to. The specific pump work was usually left for someone else. 1:48 a.m., August 13th, Shanann returns home. Chris would claim they had a talk, some heated words surrounding a separation, before making amends. Chris claimed Shanann even initiated sex. According to Chris, they would make love and fall asleep. 5:18 a.m., with Shanann, Bella, and Celeste allegedly still asleep in bed, Chris starts his work truck. captured on the neighbor's driveway cam. Chris finally leaves for work at 5:45. Thank you once again for watching or listening. And I find myself once again feeling the need to apologize for the delay in this episode. As my channel quickly grew after the release of Shanann Watts, the incredible outpour of comments and insight forced me to yet again rethink the episode. The extraordinarily high-profile nature of this case means I have to be extra careful in production. Thank you for your keen eyes. This community is truly outstanding. Incredibly, I now have 9 patrons. I can't describe the feelings that arise when receiving these notifications. Olivia PapaCostea, Tracy McReynolds, Michelle Anderson, Tracy with an E, Dakota Jones, Jamie V, and L. Kerr. Truly, thank you. I'm constantly humbled by subscriber support, and the monetary head nod does more for this series than I can verbalize. My channel is now past 5,000 subscribers, a milestone I had set for years from now. Thank you to those who've been here since day one, and welcome to those new to my channel. Chris Watts Part 3, the conclusion of the Watts family trilogy, will focus on the timeline of events from August 13th, 2018 forward. There is so much evolving after trial evidence with this case. Multiple confessions from Chris, and new players claiming exclusive information like clandestine relationships with the same sex, book deals with the people the likes of Cindy Watts. I will do my best to bypass this speculative perspective and instead attempt to give a detailed order of events, picking up where parts 1 and 2 left off and leading to the trial. Until then, thank you once again for joining me in this episode of Something Criminal.
So you don't remember kicking my heart off the dirty sidewalk? Maybe you were too high. I know you were too high. And yeah, I got the temper, but we're running the same when we're playing these games, and it's never been right. You left me high and so dry, and I'm stuck between these stop-go signs, caught inside this limbo. I'm sick of it. A circus ain't fun if you live in it. Well, no acting under. Stop, pause, go back, hold, rewind, edit out that line, and we're back again, making love a blur, and I'm medicine, strong again, dragging through our mistakes, chasing lovers of ace, they're screaming into your face. No way, find a way, we're on the edge of a break. How much do we have to take? The stars are spinning around, so take this and make a best. No more new mistakes, we need a better way. We're not the type of goddess, this is our final shot, but no more pain in us. See, remember lighting our spark in a little dive. Are you were lighting so shy? We stole the city that night, and I wish but that December pain in my heart through the light of Hyde Park got a little too wild. Rewrote my inner child. Now I'm dragging through our mistakes, chasing lovers of